Outline. My main topic is Black America, and my topic is Martin Luther King, the force behind the civil rights movement. Reason for choice of topic. I chose this topic because Martin Luther King is a very important person. He changed the lives of a lot of people, and as I said, he was the main force behind the civil rights movement. And he's also a worldwide known man. He's also a very inspirational person, for example with those non-violence resistance he led. It shows what kind of person he was, and it is a very noble act, because he got stabbed and his house were firebombed. Considering that, it's pretty cool for him to be leading non-violence resistance. He also plays a huge part in American history. And because the civil rights movement plays a huge part in American history, and without MLK, who knows, maybe it wouldn't have ever been signed. Background history. Martin Luther King was born January 15th of 1929 in Atlanta, Georgia. He grew up in a Baptist environment, as his dad were a priest and so was his granddad, and he himself later became a priest. He grew up in a black neighborhood, therefore he shared interest in the Civil Rights Act, and in 1955 he started his movement. Nonviolent resistance. In all of Martin Luther King's rallies and demonstrations, no violence was allowed to be involved. But why did he do so? It was both because of his Christian faith and because of Gandhi. Martin Luther King looked up to Gandhi, and he saw him as a role model because of what he did to India. Gandhi also led non-violence resistance, which MLK obviously did as well. And he also wanted to do it because of his Christian faith. Because Jesus said the following, "But I tell you, love your enemies, bless those who curse you, do good to those who hate you, and pray for those who mistreat you and persecute you." He wanted to use the power of words and not the power of guns or violence. But in that way, he also got more attention from the government, as he weren't just some crazy lunatic who went around and shot people, but he actually used his intellect and his intelligence. I Have a Dream. On August 28th of 1963, Martin Luther King held probably the most famous speech of all time, and it was named I Have a Dream. It was during a huge rally in Washington where 200,000 to 300,000 participated. And in this speech, Martin Luther King said the following, "I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character." This quote went on to be very, very famous. Because this speech and this rally got so much attention, it put pressure on the president to do something. And only 1 year later, the Civil Rights Act was signed. I think this speech will always be remembered as it is a huge milestone in the history of the Civil Rights Act. And it's a complete turning point in my opinion. The impact on America. Martin Luther King was of course the leader of the Civil Rights movement. He changed America and he changed the life of African Americans. He was a very important person because without him, who knows what would have been today. And he got much attention from it, so he was a role model for millions of African Americans in America. In 1964, he actually won the Nobel Peace Prize award, and he was the youngest dude to do so. The aftermath of Martin Luther King's death. On April the 4th of 1968, Martin Luther King was shot dead at a balcony at a motel where he was staying. After that, cities erupted. I saw one interview with a guy who went to school when he was shot and killed. He was immediately sent home because he lived in an African American neighborhood, and riots were beginning to start in the street, just like we're seeing today with George Floyd in America right now. It just shows how much it means, because all of these people who did so did it in grief and sorrow. But ironically, they used violence, and that's just not what Martin Luther King wanted. So it's a bit ironic, but they obviously did it because they lost a role model, and Martin Luther King was probably one of the most famous African Americans of all time. So all in all, I can conclude that Martin Luther King had a huge impact on America, and him along others like Rosa Parks changed America for good.